Hello, hello. This is the My Artifact episode number 4166. Today's date is July 21, 2026. It's been almost like morning at exactly 9 a.m. I am at the rooftop. I am holding an umbrella, and the rain, because of the rain, that's why I'm actually holding the umbrella. Okay, and I need to like. Like usually at this period of time, I usually record artifact, video artifact, but obviously the rain is actually happening. I cannot able to perform the like like right. Okay, so that's why I'm kind of like simply walking, holding a rooftop, recording artifact. So yeah, that kind of like a little bit makes sense at all. All right, so should we jump into the question? All right, let's go. All right, so question is, wait, where is the question? Okay, yeah. The question is, why would someone record daily artifact? Oh, that's a really good question. All right, first of all, what exactly is this question and why am I asking this question to myself? I wanted to build a AI that could predict the future. Name's Adam. Why? Uh, like why you are trying to build such a AI that could kind of like predict the future? Because of that, ki I can. Okay, like right now, na, because of this, I don't really have any kind of like a proper answer regarding about that. Ki why I wanted to kind of like a build such a AI that could predict the future. I don't really have a reason, but I have so many reason that ki why not I shouldn't supposed to be make that such a AI. Why? Because I think that now I could able to make it. I could able to be kind of like a build something that could predict the kind of like some the future, and is because of that ki the way that I'm seeing the world, and I don't know, like how do I supposed to explain this thing? It's a very weird thing. Okay, like right now I don't really have any kind of like answer that why I need to build such a AI that could predict the future. Okay, yeah. But I do have a kind of like a lot of answer regarding about that ki why I cannot able to be make, or why we shouldn't supposed to be make, or like what is actually the kind of like some reason that ki that key like that key. Okay, it's a very difficult, let me kind of like explain this thing. Okay, I am recording artifact for past almost like 11 year. Okay, artifact means like that ki kind of like a diary, like writing a diary. It's kind of like that, instead of writing a diary I'm kind of like a recording a diary. Okay, now I'm kind of like doing this thing for past 11 year, and because of this thing it add so much amount of value inside of me. I am kind of like a seeing the world very different point of perspective. I'm actually seeing the world that ki how does people think, how does people act, how does world actually kind of like a going. Okay, I am actually seeing what does kind of like a simply people might gonna think, and what might gonna affect on them. I also kind of like a think that ki why does people are kind of like a so crippled or so fragile? Why does some people are kind of like a so strong and things and that and that. By the way, this is what I think. It's my hypothesis. It just I don't know. It just kind of like some sort of instinct inside of me that I have, that I might think like that. Okay. Now, if I'm trying to explain this thing, so let me explain something. Every person is how good is are or how bad is kind of like it not depend on that particular person. It depend on the surrounding where he grew up and things and that and that. But it also depend on that particular person too, because of that surrounding kind of like a shape that particular person, shape that particular thought process, and from that thought process, he might be kind of like a became that exactly kind of like that particular person according to surrounding. Okay, like higher possible chances, or maybe something very different. Example, let's just say entire life you are kind of like a living in a slum area. So what chances that you might have in the future? So basically if your entire life has kind of like a living in the slum area, so you have kind of like a possibility is this thing that you will kind of like a live the rest of the life in a slum too. Okay, if you are kind of like a like just okay, just kind of like only 50% of the people. then 20% of the people are try to improve. Okay, instead of kind of like living in the slum, they decided that no, I have to be kind of like make my life as better as possible. So they try to put effort and things and that, and they kind of like get a job, and they are kind of like get out from that slum and kind of like living in kind of like a normal society and things and that. Now, like this is kind of like a basically maybe kind of like a 40% of the kind of like a people, and then 10% of the people who are kind of like a thinking that ki, like basically the because of they are kind of like living the entire life in slum, they kind of like a seen the kind of like a crime and things and that higher possible chances that they will become the kind of like a criminal mindset and things and that. It's a kind of like a human psychology, our surrounding kind of like influence our thought process and things and that. Yeah, that is a kind of like a things like a basically this thing. If you are kind of like a start living with a kind of like a people who are kind of like a chess player, higher possible chances that you will kind of like a become a chess player. Okay, yeah. If all your friends are kind of like a YouTubers and things and that, higher possible chances that you will also become the YouTuber and things and that. It's a kind of like that. Now you are the average of your surrounding. Okay, and this is what I kind of like realize something. Okay, regarding about what they think and that. Okay, now not just kind of like a people, but I also kind of like a see the nature is also kind of like a work according to it. Okay, yeah. Why does kind of like a Sahara is called why does Sahara desert is a kind of like a desert? Why not there is a not so many planets, sorry, not so kind of like a plants? Why does kind of like a Amazon are filled with a lot of kind of like a trees and things and that? Why is that? Is because of the kind of like a simply the way that our earth it is like a basically is this thing that rainforest, the cloud structure, the kind of like a simply the how much kind of like a simply the rain are accumulated over there, and kind of like the land is kind of like a bit more fertile and things and that. So yeah, somewhat something like that. Okay, so basically what I realized something like that na ki, like basically the entire life people around like basically the people situation nature is actually kind of like a follow the one kind of like a truth. Okay, and that truth is a probability. Okay, yeah. Like how much probability that you are kind of like a experiencing with such kind of like a people, like basically is this thing that if you are kind of like a started living with a kind of like a chess player, then you are became a kind of like a chess player, because higher possible or higher probability chances that you have to become a chess player. Okay, yeah. A particular area is a kind of like a something so much fertile, and it has a kind of like a so much kind of like a something the plants is kind of like a there. So basically is this thing it kind of like a changed the ecosystem, and it kind of like a became more fertile land, more kind of like a some plants will be there, and as also having more plants, then more clouds and more rain will gonna happen, and then kind of like it create the ecosystem, and from that ecosystem it kind of like a create the Amazon rainforest. So I don't know how I supposed to explain this thing. Same thing goes with the kind of like a something that key celestial body. Like let's just say why does kind of like a planet Earth rotate around the sun is because of the kind of like a something inertia, and kind of like a something the gravity is kind of like a have kind of like a tug of war in between them, and because of this thing it's not kind of like a tug of war, it's a kind of like that key inertia is a kind of like a making planet go straight direction, gravity kind of like a pull them inside. So because of this thing now they are kind of like always falling into the kind of like a sun, but kind of like a create a orbit, so that's why they are kind of like a revolve around the kind of like a sun and things and that, because the probability ratio, because of that higher probability ratio that it has, it should supposed to follow the kind of like a rotation and kind of like inertia and things. So that's why they are kind of like a rotation and things like that. So what I realized that ki kind of like a rest of the world, or not just a world, kind of like a universe are kind of like a work on similar psychology regarding about the probability. Okay, how much probability chances that it has, that probability kind of like a creates a kind of like a somebody predict the possible future. And this is what kind of like a somebody when I kind of like a see that particular world in like that way, then why not kind of like a AI could able to do this thing, because AI is kind of like a much more powerful, he understands the kind of like a much more possible consequences in much more detail and things and that. If I could kind of like a think like that way, then why not kind of like Adam would kind of like a think like that way. Okay, or maybe kind of like a such AI that could predict or think like that way. Okay, so I just have to kind of like execute that particular task and try to do the simulations and things and that. So that's why I am kind of like a building AI, and basically building AI that could predict the future. And the reason is that ki why am I kind of like a building such a thing, because it will gonna add so much amount of value to the humanity. Like basically imagine that ki we already knew that how do we supposed to be kind of like a execute the task before we even execute the task, then we kind of like assembly do it much more better way. Okay, like example is this thing, let's just say I wanted to execute a policy in my country. So before that policy will execute in the real life, let's execute that policy in kind of like a simulation, in AI simulation. And in that simulation it kind of like a run through millions of possibility that what might gonna goes wrong and things and that, and kind of like a making the mistake previously before it kind of like execute, and then try to kind of like a fix it the policy to kind of like a making sure how do I supposed to kind of like a make our policy as much as better, so that it kind of like adds so much kind of like a value in the long term and things and that. So this is what it is. Okay, yeah. There are kind of like a so many possibility that I kind of like a realize that ki if I kind of like a build such a Adam, build such a AI that could kind of like a predict the possible future, then why not? Yeah, why not? I shouldn't supposed to do that thing. So that's why I'm kind of like a building such a AI that could predict the future. Okay, yeah. Now before I wanted to build such a kind of like AI that could predict the future, I need to know a couple of things. Okay, yeah. First of all is that I need to aware of that ki if I build such a thing that would kind of like a predict the possible future, then what might gonna happen? What might be a possible consequences? So I went to ChatGPT. I tell my kind of like a things that I wanted to build such a AI that could predict the future. Suggest me hundreds of question. ChatGPT kind of like a suggest me hundreds of question. This is one of those question. Now regarding about this question, the question says that why does people will kind of like a record the artifact daily? Okay, yeah. Okay, what is exactly the artifact? Artifact is a kind of like a something the it's a kind of like a social media kind of like a platform. Okay, yeah. Adam and Artifact both are kind of like a same. Okay, not same, is a kind of like a only Artifact is a kind of like a social media platform where people who kind of like a record their artifact every single day regarding about what exactly happened in their life and things and that and that. The question is that why does people do that thing? Yeah, why does people will kind of like a record the artifact every single day? Okay, yeah. Now basically is this thing, we are humans and our action is kind of like a depend on how much like how much things that we get in return. Okay, what is actually in return? Return means like that what kind of like a stuff that we get in return. Okay, return means like that, like basically is this thing, if I dig the hole and someone kind of like a give me 500 rupees, so 500 rupees are kind of like exchange of my effort. Okay, like I put the effort, 500 rupees I get it, so that is a kind of like some exchange of my effort. So I put the effort, I get the money, because kind of like an entire system or entire kind of like a some human civilization actually kind of like a work on money system, because like a basically when you have money, then people will kind of like a put the effort for you and things and that, right? Now artifact is a kind of like a things that key I will not gonna kind of like a give them money, like not directly, but monetization program will kind of like a differently, but I will not gonna talk about that. But it's not really that key kind of like a I will kind of like a somebody give the money and kind of like a people will record the artifact. No, it's not really that. Okay, yeah, people will kind of like a record the artifact every single day. Now why does people will do that? Okay, yeah. Okay, basically is this thing that na ki sometimes effort is a kind of like a bit more different. Example is this thing, when you are kind of like putting a physical effort, like basically digging the hole and things and that, so that's called kind of like a physical effort. Okay, yeah. Now another thing is that na kind of like a mental effort. What's a mental effort? Mental effort means like that, let's say a kind of like a you are preparing for exam, so that is called kind of like mental effort. You are putting effort mentally regarding about understanding things and that and that and that and that and that. Okay, basically is this thing, I'm doing this recording artifact, like stuff that you are kind of like listening right now, this is my artifact. Okay, yeah. And artifact is a kind of like a bit more different. Why it's different? Because artifact is a kind of like a some places thing, it's not kind of like a rely on how much effort that you put, it's kind of like a rely on how much kind of like a something the pressure that you have to kind of like a somebody like a put on away and things like that. Let me tell you, people who are kind of like a living the life, they've been through a lot of kind of like a struggle things and that problem and stuff like that. They need to kind of like a something that say what they wanted to share and things and that. Why? Because of that we are kind of like a social animal, we are not humans, we are kind of like a social animal, and we always wanted to kind of like a somebody say something, because it kind of like a makes us kind of like a somebody feel lighter and things and that, because when we kind of like a speak kind of like a somebody like a clearly, we kind of like a feel really good. That's why we kind of like a somebody talk to the people who are kind of like a friends and things and that, and we feel really good after talking to them, because we kind of like release everything and things and that. Because alone it would be kind of like a much more kind of like a crippled. Example is this thing. Imagine as a kind of like a pressure cooker. Every day that we are kind of like living the life, grinding and things and that, it's kind of like something that pressure is actually still inside of us and things and that, and there is no way to kind of like let it out. Okay, there is no way. By the way, there are a couple of platforms, by the way, Instagram and YouTube platform, that you could kind of like express and things and that, but those are for the kind of like a very limited amount of people. Like example is this thing. In Instagram, kind of like assembly, Instagram platform is actually meant for kind of like assembly socializing in visual point of perspective. Means like that whatever the stuff that you are thinking is not kind of like a depend, it kind of like a, you are kind of like a sharing kind of like a how should you supposed to be look on things and that. It's a visual based platform. Same goes with the YouTube is a kind of like a bit more difficult, because if you want to share your thought process and things and that in YouTube platform, then YouTube does not really care that all, because YouTube kind of like a based on kind of like a content execution process. Means like that your content should supposed to be kind of like a really good and things and that. So basically this thing, you can express your thoughts in YouTube platform, but the problem is that now you need to put another extra effort to kind of like add the editing and things and that, to kind of like things and stuff like that. You could able to be kind of like a directly upload without any editing, but no one will kind of like a see. Like right now you might gonna see right now, after almost like a 10-20 year, before that this artifact will kind of like stay on YouTube, and no one will kind of like a watch and things and that, because it's kind of like a boring and things, and it's a kind of like a raw and authentic. Okay, so do you understand? So what I'm trying to tell you is this thing, that na ki there is no platform are actually available to kind of like express our thoughts and things and that. Artifact is that kind of like a platform where people will kind of like record their thoughts and things and that, and not because of that ki they want something in returns. No, they because of that ki they will wanted to kind of like share their thoughts and things and that what exactly happened their mind, and they wanted to kind of like let it release and things and that. Okay, yeah, at the beginning they will kind of like a bit really awkward and things and that, but sooner they will kind of like record the artifact, it kind of like add value in them too. Like basically this thing, it's not really that ki they will not gonna get anything at all, they will kind of like get so many things in return. Like basically this thing, it's not a kind of like a somebody's this thing that you dig the hole, get 500 rupees and that's it. No, it's a kind of like that na ki you kind of like record the artifact, your mental is kind of like a bit more clear. Okay, your mental energy kind of like a bit more clear, you are kind of like a thinking much more kind of like a bigger point of perspective. Okay, yeah, or you are thinking from other people point of perspective. When you kind of like you understand yourself more regarding about who you are, what you are, because for entire period of lifetime you kind of like met thousands of people, but basically you don't know yourself because of that na ki it's kind of like a things. Okay, yeah, because we didn't really talk to ourselves that much. Artifact is a kind of like a platform where you actually kind of like connect with yourself, you talk with yourself and things and that. So the rain is gone, by the way. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna close the umbrella. Okay, so because of that thing, okay, so that's why kind of like a people will kind of like record the artifact every single day, not because of that ki they will kind of like get something in return. They will kind of like get something in return if they are kind of like recording artifact for almost like a more than 2-3 year. Obviously their thought process shifted, they kind of like a thinking process much more different. Like basically right now I am actually thinking like that way. Okay, yeah, why am I kind of like thinking like that way? Am I kind of like born at somewhere, or am I kind of like reading a lot of kind of like books and things and that? No, definitely not. Like basically I'm reading a book, but these are kind of like changes that actually happened like just couple of years ago. Before that I was just a kind of like a recording artifact, and that's it. And only one thing that I did is I'm just kind of like being consistent with the kind of like a recording artifact. And when I kind of like did this thing, it had so much amount of value inside of me. I'm kind of like thinking from very different point of perspective. Whatever the knowledge that I have till now or will be in the future, it is all because of the artifact. Because I am seeing the world, okay, instead of kind of like consuming how it world, I'm kind of like seeing the world how it should supposed to be, things and that. Yes, I did make mistake, yes, I kind of like a fuck up. Like basically is this thing, if you are kind of like thinking from success in kind of like a visual point of perspective, then let me tell you one thing. I'm 33, I'm living with my parents, I'm not really earning any money, I'm kind of like a stupid shit right now. Obviously there are more possible chances or more possible reason that you shouldn't supposed to be listen this thing. But still, if you are kind of like listening this thing, is because of that ki I already became something, and because of I already became something, that's why you're kind of like listening right now. So it makes sense that artifact is kind of like a work. Okay, so that is a kind of like a things. Okay, yeah, so does people will kind of like a record artifact daily? Yeah, they will. It's not because of that ki like I will kind of like give them money. Like I will also give them money. Like it's not only that. Like the monetization program is also be there too. Okay, but still is this thing the most of the kind of like stuff that you get when you record the artifact. Huh. There is also another thing is that na ki privacy. Okay, yeah, privacy is also kind of like making sure that people will kind of like get privacy as much as possible. Privacy is a kind of like a very essential platform, because let's just say people who kind of like record the artifact is kind of like a bit more shady, bit more kind of like something personal, bit more kind of like a things and that kind of like that key having that much privacy will kind of like a making sure that they will not gonna kind of like mention their name, other people name and things and that just talk, just tell your story and things and that this is the all I want. Okay, so so basically privacy is also a bit more concern. I will kind of like making sure that now basically is this thing artifact is a kind of like a sort of base information that Adam used for kind of like do the simulation, do the kind of like a understand the kind of like a possible scenario to run the simulation, to kind of like a run the how much kind of like a people might gonna affect if I kind of like implement that kind of like a only future and things and that. Okay, so yeah, so the question is that does people will kind of like record artifact daily? I think they will record artifact daily. Okay, yeah. Wait. Oh my god. Okay, let me tell you something fact about sneeze. Okay, so when you sneeze, so basically what exactly happened that your kind of like a lungs are kind of like a compress and kind of like a throw out everything from your mouth, from the kind of like a just blower, air blower. Okay, yeah. So have you ever kind of like assembly realize that how much kind of like speed it would be? Okay, yeah. So basically is this thing when you sneeze and when that particular kind of like a stuff is came out from your mouth, like a basically the like a splash of kind of like a simply the spit of something. Okay, yeah, it travel almost like Mach 1 exactly sound of speed. Yeah, like literally when you are kind of like a sneeze, you kind of like a throwing something at the speed of sound. Okay, yeah, that is what it is. Okay, that's a kind of like I think that's a kind of like over exaggerated, probably. I'm not really sure. I kind of like read something, but probably the speed of kind of like a throwing spit, probably. Wait, let me Google. I kind of like only read at somewhere or listen at somewhere maybe. Let me. Okay, so basically the Google says that 100 mile per hour, that means 160 kilometer per hour. Oh, sorry. I was completely wrong. I thought that probably it would be almost like a Mach 1 speed. Mach 1 speed means like that 1000 kilometer per hour or more than that, 1000 to at least, I'm not really sure, 1000 to almost like 1200 something. But it says that 160 kilometer per hour, which is also really massive, but it's not kind of considered as a Mach 1. The speed air force out of lung is range from 30 to 100 miles per hour. The droplet sneeze example and distance is yeah, it would be kind of like a 160 kilometer per hour. Sorry about my judgmental. I was kind of like wrong in that thing, but particular thing. Whatever. So yeah, so the question is that does people will kind of like record artifact daily? Yeah, they will. All right. Also it depends on trust too. Okay, because of that na ki like basically is this thing that na ki it's a very personal thing. Okay, yeah, why would people kind of like record artifact daily? Okay, and why would kind of like they trust on my platform that they will kind of like record artifact daily? Okay, yeah, why is that? Is my platform is kind of like as good as possible? Like am I kind of like providing them something? No, it is actually because of that ki I am doing this thing. Because of that na ki I am kind of like a recording artifact for past 11 years. I have kind of like experience whatever the artifact that I recorded, uploaded on YouTube platform, and I build this platform about like with my experience and things and that. So basically they are not kind of like trusting on the platform, they are actually trusting on me, because I kind of like became something in the future and they wanted to become something like me. Okay, not like me, but kind of like somebody that better at. Okay, so yeah, so basically it's this thing that they will kind of like record artifact daily is because it comes from the trust, and that trust is actually came from me. Because They just wanted to know that ki, why would I supposed to be kind of like a record artifact. I just need evidence, and they will kind of like find all the kind of like thousands of artifact in the YouTube platform which is actually available over there. So yeah, so probably is this thing that it's a kind of like a stress evidence and things and that. So yeah, and also is this thing, the reason is that basically, as I mentioned, that the probability ratio, okay, like if everyone are kind of like a recording artifact, higher possible chances that you also record an artifact too. Okay. Yeah, so yeah, this is kind of like simply the human civilization, and not only the human civilization, entire universe is actually kind of like based on that a probability. That is a kind of like a truth of life. I don't know why, but yesterday I kind of like find that thing that what is actually truth of universe is the probability. Okay, yeah, like higher possible probability ratio that you have, it kind of like makes sure that would be kind of like a probability of truth. Okay, yeah, like basically from last couple of months, I was kind of like building an atom, not building atom by the way. I was kind of like thinking that how do I supposed to build the atom and things and that. And the one thing that is always been kind of like bother to me is that how the atom will kind of like predict the possible future. How does atom will kind of like determine what is actually right and wrong, because the right and wrong statement is a kind of like a much more difficult to understand and things and that. I was actually thinking from every possible point of perspective. Then I realized that right and wrong statement are the relative. Okay, yeah, it kind of like a change according to time and things and that. Example, if I ask you killing hundreds of people or killing people is right and wrong, you might gonna say no, like that is a completely wrong. Killing people is completely wrong. Okay, but if I went to thousand year back and I will kind of like say killing people is right and wrong, most of people might gonna say yeah, it's okay to kill people. Okay, yeah, because of that na ki thousands of years ago people kind of like think very differently and things and that the life of human is kind of like a non-existence over there. So do you understand na, like basically this thing right and wrong statement are kind of like a relative, it change respective with the time. So basically this thing, what is at least this fixed standard. So I need a kind of like a fixed standard, and I realized that the fixed standard is not a right and wrong thing. It's fixed standard is a probability, and probability is a kind of like a depend on how many people think it is right and how many people think it is wrong. Okay, so right and wrong statement does not depend on right and wrong. It depends on kind of like how much probability that might think that is a right and wrong. So yeah, and that is the truth of universe. I don't know, but kind of like Adam kind of like a run on that kind of like this is a kind of like a core principle of that, and Adam kind of like run the simulation on that core principle to kind of like execute the possible scenario. I think I'm not really sure. Yeah. Whatever. I have to end here. This is it, and thank you.